Welcome back to the third part of the Government Cover-Up's Iceberg. Hello to all my new subscribers. Thank you so much for subscribing. It means the world, and I hope you can enjoy this series as much as I've enjoyed making it. Let's get right into it. Bloody Sunday. January 30th, 1972, a bunch of Irish activists and civil rights protesters gathered in the city of Derry. The British military sent in the parachute regiment, and they basically cornered all the protesters into one part of Derry and opened fire, and they killed 14 people, and it sparked a bunch of protests and outrage across the world. The Cranberries also wrote a song about it called Zombie, which became very popular and was a smash hit, and this kind of became like a rallying cry for the Irish Republican movement. Next up, we have the Howshey Power Station, which, as far as I could tell, doing research for this, it's just a coal-burning electricity power generator. Possibly how this could be a government cover-up is some clueless government officials could be saying it's like free, sustainable energy, which is a common thing that a lot of people, green activists, and just clueless politicians spout and say when they don't actually know where electricity comes from, but that's all I could find for this one. Next up, we have the tobacco industry cover-up, which basically a bunch of tobacco companies paid off government officials to lie about the side effects of smoking and cover up a bunch of scientific research and just kind of suppress the notion that there were any side effects or any bad side effects to smoking. They also put out a bunch of like misleading advertisements saying it was good for you or it made you a better person. And it was really popular to see ads for smoking on children's television shows and just general media. The government funded a lot of research to cast doubt on there being any side effects to smoking, and there was a lot of lobbying to prevent regulations that would kind of mess with all of the money that they were making. I really can't ever imagine the government doing anything like that in the modern day, where they would be potentially trying to suppress some kind of information about a thing where a lot of like medical companies or oil companies or energy companies paid off government officials so that, you know, like free clean energy like cold nuclear fusion or side effects of, you know, potential medical things that are being pushed on the general population. Next up, we have Van Gogh didn't kill himself, which actually is an interesting story. I don't know if it counts as a government cover-up, but it's on the Iceberg. Basically, Van Gogh was in conflict with a lot of kids that were around the town, a lot of teenagers. Just rowdy stuff. There was an old guy, they threw rocks at him, like that type of stuff. You know what I'm talking about. And eventually it came down that this rich nobleman's son, who was one of the boys that Van Gogh was kind of in an antagonistic relationship with, shot Van Gogh, got a hold of a gun and shot Van Gogh accidentally. Van Gogh felt bad and didn't want this kid to go to jail for the rest of his life, so he went home and made it look like it was a suicide, kind of a Knives Out type scenario. Spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, but it's been out for a while. He also left no suicide note, which that man loved writing letters. I wish I loved anything as much as Van Gogh loved writing letters. So if Van Gogh was to actually kill himself, he would have written a note. The full story was only brought to light in 2011. Agent Orange was an herbicide that was sprayed on the forests in Vietnam to clear out the vast jungle that the Viet Cong were able to occupy and kind of launch their guerrilla warfare attacks from. So the US government sprayed the area with Agent Orange, which was called Agent Orange because they came in like large barrels that had an orange stripe around them. The soldiers that were around them and were exposed to the material developed a lot of sicknesses and illnesses because Agent Orange contained dioxin, which is a highly toxic chemical. And the Department of Defense, who we've talked about a lot in these videos, attempted to cover it up completely, and all the veterans who had long-term sicknesses and died and were trying to get medical treatment, or just the families trying to get some form of compensation, was denied, and they attempted to cover it up for years and years and years, but it eventually got out, and it's been woven into a lot of plots of films and a number of things in Hollywood, including one of the best movies I've ever watched, First Blood. The other Rambo movies are good too, but First Blood is peak cinema. Overall, it's a tragedy that's plagued a lot of Vietnam War veterans, and people who lost friends overseas often came home to find other friends who had survived dying of illnesses from the dioxin poisoning. The Benghazi Scandal. This is a story that I take very seriously. I am not the person to go into depth on this or explain this story properly. I'm not able to do it the justice that it deserves. So in the description, if you go to the Benghazi Scandal, I have left a number of links to articles, interviews, and the general Wikipedia page, which I wouldn't recommend looking at, but I left it there anyway. Regardless, the story is messed up on so many angles. If I have to sum it up really quickly, basically there was a coordinated terror attack on a compound to try and assassinate the US ambassador of Libya. GRS forces were able to hold off a series of attacks, but the ambassador was in another building and he was killed, as well as several other GRS members, all of them heroes. There is a film adaptation, 13 hours, which is surprisingly accurate. I cannot recommend it enough. The interview that I have linked into the bottom is one of the survivors of the attacks, one of the GRS members who spent hours fighting off foreign forces. And I really cannot recommend it enough. It's an important story that needs to be told. The government trying to cover up what actually happened and how incompetent they were on that day. While this was going on, the sitting president of the United States was flying to Vegas to hang out with Jay-Z and Beyonce. But Hillary Clinton refused to offer any aid to the dying soldiers who were fending off the terrorists, and instead the Libyan military had to step in and send some of their own men to come and offer aid. So again, I really cannot do this story the justice that it deserves, so please go to the description, watch the movie, read the articles, watch the interviews. It's an important story that we cannot let be forgotten. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. 2nd of August 1964, the U.S. ship the Maddox was attacked by a North Vietnamese vessel. Torpedoes were launched, there was a small skirmish, and the ship escaped. On August 4th of 1964, on the radar of the ship the Maddox, a bunch of blips showed up and they thought that they were being attacked again, but it later turned out to have been an equipment malfunction. This was reported back to the U.S. government. And then Secretary Robert McNamara had a conversation with several people on the phone. All of this has now been released 40 years later. Basically, Robert McNamara used this false second attack to justify attacks towards northern Vietnam, another instance of further government corruption involving the Vietnam War. The Lusitania was a British ocean liner that was sunk on May 7th, 1915 during World War I. A bunch of American citizens were on there and over 1,100 people died, and that's eventually what led the U.S. to joining World War I. A couple weeks before the ship went out to sea, the German government took out advertisements in the paper telling all American citizens, hey, don't get on here, we're going to sink this boat. The British government assured the U.S., oh no, that's just a hoax, that's just a prank, it's going to be fine, don't worry about it. And looking back on it, it now seems like Britain let a bunch of U.S. citizens die to drum up anti-German support in the U.S. And again, this is World War I, not World War II, no bad mustache man. So it was a little harder for them to drum up support originally, but that's eventually what led to them joining World War I. The bear contamination. At first, it was hard to figure out which major poisoning case involving bears that this was referencing because there are so many. From them losing $850 million lawsuits over Monsanto's PCB lighting causing brain damage in schools, to growing concerns over cancer-causing chemicals in their genetically modified food products. But it turns out it was referencing the time that they knowingly spread HIV-contaminated medicine throughout the world with the help of the FDA. So the FDA was paid off by pharmaceutical companies. How many times does this need to happen before we can recognize that there's a pattern? The Rana Plaza scandal happened on April 24th, 2013, when an 8-story commercial building in Savar, Bangladesh collapsed, taking the lives of over 1,000 workers that were inside of there. The building was full of multiple clothing factories where workers were producing clothing for a bunch of different international brands. The building was not up to code and was only really still standing through a series of government loopholes. The Bangladesh government tried to cover up why exactly it had fallen and the extent of the misconduct inside of there, but I mean, the day before it fell, there were like giant cracks in the side of the building, and like it was very clear that it was about to fall. But the factory owner still pressured all of the workers and forced them to go inside and work, and that led to 1,000 of their deaths. So this was a major scandal, and a lot of companies cut trade with Bangladesh from this point until they got all of those loopholes and weird little laws changed or altered. Track 61 refers to a series of underground tunnels that are underneath the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which have been used to shuttle multiple presidents around under the bowels of the city, basically protect them from harm. There were rumors that FDR had used the tunnel frequently and would be driven in his bulletproof car into his own train car, and then they would be driven all the way down through the tunnel. But later they looked at it, and it's just not physically possible that they were going to be fitting a car onto the size of that train car, especially not a giant bulletproof vehicle, which in that time was a beefy boy. But it is a series of tunnels that have been used by multiple presidents, including Barack Obama. Speaking of underground subterranean layers, the Denver International Airport, which is home to 6 secret subterranean levels, military bases, and like a ton of strange phenomena, from a demon horse statue named Lucifer that killed its creator, giant disturbing satanic murals, Masonic time capsules, talking gargoyles, and a supposed secret underground doomsday bunker. I could make like an entire hour-long video on just the Denver International Airport alone, and honestly, I might. It's a really weird place with a lot of interesting stories and myths and strange stories that come out of there. The Dreyfus Affair was a scandal in France in the late 19th and early 20th century. It involved a Jewish artillery captain in the French army named Alfred Dreyfus, and he was falsely convicted of passing military secrets on to the Germans, because in 1984, a French spy in the German embassy found a crumpled up piece of paper, and he said the handwriting kind of looked like his, which was total BS. But nevertheless, Dreyfus was court-martialed, found guilty of treason, and then sentenced to life behind bars in Devil's Island, which is a name, and that's an island off of French Guiana. In a public ceremony in Paris after his conviction, he had his sword broken and his insignia torn off his uniform, and the whole crowd was just chanting a lot of really anti-Semitic things, which is fun. In 1896, though, the new head of the Army's intelligence unit, Georges Picquart, figured out there was actually another military officer named Major Ferdinand Walson Esterhazy as the actual traitor. Ignore my butchering of French. I don't speak it. I can't speak it. That's just going to be the way it is. But as soon as he told people about this, he was discouraged from continuing his investigation. Basically, he got transferred to North Africa and then thrown to prison. And it wasn't until 1906 when Dreyfus was actually exonerated and the country issued an apology. The NSA's PRISM program was a surveillance program that was leaked and brought to light by Edward Snowden when he leaked a bunch of documents in 2013. And it basically showed how the US government was working with a bunch of tech companies and paying them to surveil the data of their users and show it to the government, and basically let the NSA have access to everyone's private information. It's been an ongoing battle between Republicans and Democrats over whether or not to discontinue the program, with Republicans saying that it's against the US citizens' civil liberties, and the Democrats saying it's important to help them find domestic terrorists and stop them in their tracks. As of now, there have been no cases of the PRISM program ever being used to stop any domestic terrorism. Karen Silkwood was a chemical technician who worked at the Kara McGee Cimarron fuel fabrication site in Oklahoma. She attempted to blow the whistle on a nuclear smuggling ring that was going on there, and she was leaving the facility with a car full of documents and manila envelopes when suddenly she crashed and died. An autopsy found that she had traces of sedatives and alcohol in her bloodstream, and there were skid marks on the road where seemingly a car ran her off the road into her eventual death. The manila envelopes were strewn all over the floor of the car and across the road. The policeman who answered the call to the scene picked them all up and put them in a storage locker, where the next day they were missing. This case sparked a bunch of public outrage. People got very upset about it and called for justice, and her family eventually sued and got a very generous settlement in court. And that brings us to the end of the third part of the government cover-ups Iceberg. I've really been enjoying this series. I'm keeping this on weekly uploads, so one part a week. I've also been putting out shorts, and that's been helping with the channel a bunch. I've gotten a bunch of new subscribers off of that. Hello to all of you. Thank you for watching. If you got to the end of the video, I really appreciate it. If you're not subscribed or you haven't left a like in the video, leaving a like or subscribing, commenting down below helps the video tremendously with the algorithm. Thank you so much. And as always, stay safe, stay strapped, and I will see you in the next one.